Hey, all, Doug here. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. Sorry, it's been so scattered as of late. All kinds of different things coming at you, I know, here in the podcast. But on my show, the Minnesota Progressive Repartee that I host on AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, I had a little conversation about democratic socialism and if that's really what we mean when we say, in this country, some people, Bernie Sanders, AOC, and others, democratic socialism. And I'm trying to work out this idea for myself and also work out the idea with people like you and with the listeners of the show. So here's my little take for 20 minutes or so about what I think is going on with the term democratic socialism, progressivism, and then we get some callers that have some great input as well. So I hope you enjoy this little shortened version of the podcast on democratic socialism or not. Hey, here's what I want to do for the remainder of this segment and the next, because I think it sort of leans into this. I was in a great conversation this last week about whether democratic socialism, as is pushed by Bernie Sanders and AOC and others, is the best way to frame what the position of progressive Democrats should be. I want to argue no on that. And here's why. Because I'm not sure that the way that AOC and Bernie Sanders and others are talking about democratic socialism is even actually democratic socialism. I think what they're actually describing is some kind of progressivism singular to the United States at this place in time. And I think that's a better way to talk about it. Here's what I mean. And perhaps you've already done your own reading and research about what the definition of democratic socialism. But here's one which I think comes from, a pretty reputable description on Wikipedia of democratic socialism. Democratic socialism is defined, as having a socialist economy in which the means of production, including wealth, are socially and collectively owned or controlled alongside a politically democratic system of government. Peter Hain classifies a democratic socialist along with libertarian socialism as a form of anti-authoritarian socialism from below, sits in contrast to Stalinism. So anyway, they go on. And the idea of democratic socialism is that the voting side, the governmental side, is democratic, but that the social economy includes the means of production and wealth are socially and collectively owned or controlled, right? That's your general basic run-of-the-mill description of democratic socialism, right? That's a fine argument you can have. There's some states that have this, right? There's some countries rather that have this. The curious thing is Bernie Sanders in 2015, in describing what democratic socialism is in Time magazine, said this. According to Sanders, it is not tied to Marxist belief, of course, or to abolish capitalism. According to Sanders, quote, I don't believe government should own the means of production, but I do believe that the middle class and working families who produce the wealth of America deserve a fair deal. I agree with Bernie Sanders on that. Now, his argument is, I do not believe by this statement, I think he would still hold to this. I think this is honesty around Bernie Sanders' claim. I do not believe that the government should own the means of production, but I do believe that the middle class and other workers need to get a fair deal. If the definition of democratic socialism is that the means of production, including wealth, are socially and collectively owned. Now, if what Bernie Sanders means is a subset of what the prime definition of democratic socialism is, then maybe. So here's the thing. I posted this meme on Facebook that is a quote from Harry Truman from 1952. The quote from Harry Truman that he gave on he was stumping for other candidates. His point in 1952 is this. Look, he says, from the back of a train. I really wish we could have had video of this. It would have just been so awesome. He says, socialism has been a scare word that Republicans have hurled at every advance the people have made in the last 20 years. This is 1952. Socialism is what they called public power. Socialism is what they called Social Security. Socialism is what they called farm price supports. Socialism is what they called bank deposit insurance. Socialism is what they called the growth of free and independent labor organization. And socialism is their name for almost anything that helps all the people. Harry Truman, October 10th, 1952. So Harry Truman's trying to make a point. Look, the Republicans are demonizing Democrats for ideas that help all the people, trying to make the system of American economy and democracy work. They keep calling that socialism, and it's not. It's caring for one another. But then something has shifted where there's kind of a sense that we want there to be something called socialism. So I think now people like the Democratic Socialist movement of people are actually shoehorning, in my view, progressive ideas and calling them and claiming that those are actually socialist ideas. If Harry Truman was right that this is the miscategorization of this as socialism. Now, do I care or not whether it's called socialism or not? Do I care about the header that goes above the work being done? No, I don't. But the problem is, for some people, the distraction of socialism, if someone says, well, I actually think the government shouldn't own the means of production or the wealth, then when they hear someone who's a democratic socialist say, well, I don't think the government should own the means of production either, I just think people should get a fair deal, then they tilt their head with that curious dog look and say, but then is that democratic socialism, or is it just fair private ownership and capitalism by which the government should be involved in setting a more fair set of rules and not simply letting market forces be the only thing? I think what Senator Sanders, what others, AOC and others, are actually calling for is a much more fair economic and political system where the government is not lending its weight toward helping the super wealthy to control and to dominate workers and others, but where they're trying to create a more fair deal for everyone. But the more fair deal is probably not what most people either technically or colloquially mean by democratic socialism. So when you say what we want to have is health care that's accessible to everyone through Medicare for all. Well, you can get to Medicare for all without saying that the government's going to own the delivery system. They're going to own the hospitals. They're just going to say that the reimbursement rate, which is what you get to in Medicare. So I think there's a progressive idea to our economic system and a progressive idea to our corporate system that we could be pushing for. And I think this is a curious debate that's happening in our society right now, where people are being asked to parse out very technical terms. And sometimes people get called on this, whether something, and you're a little unclear whether you want something to be socialism or not. So we'll get to the callers here after the break. AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota. Devin, if you can hold on over the break, we'll get to you here. And so stick with us over the break, and we'll talk about this when we come back. Hey, that's a nice little bumper there. Did we get that just today, Brett? Did you just get that recorded with the sheriff?
Indeed, when he was just in for the 3 o'clock hour.
Yes. Fantastic. I like having a sheriff on our side. Feels good for once. Hey, Devin in Faribault, you've got some thoughts here on your take on socialism.
Yeah, Doug, I agree with you about democratic socialism being a very scary word for Republicans and conservatives in general. But I don't think progressivism is the alternate term. I think that Democrats as a whole have not been good at claiming language and helping language frame our beliefs. And I think a better way of looking at what we're really looking for in our economy is a word or a term like social capitalism.
Yeah.
Go ahead, embrace capitalism. That's what we have. You know, I love free enterprise. I have my own business. I love making money for myself. But I also recognize that capitalism that has only the self-interest of corporations at heart, which is what we have now, is not serving our public.
Yeah.
And so when you add a social element to capitalism, and in that, what we really want is a system that balances the benefits of for people as well as corporations. You know, let's walk that line. Let's have a minimum wage that people can live on. You know, that's part of social capitalism. So weave those social ideas into capitalism instead of allowing the ism to be socialism. It's capitalism, but it's got a social element.
I really like that. And I think, and I'm not even sure that always goes far enough for everyone, right? Because there's something about, and Devin, I appreciate this, and I want to trick this out with you a bit, because I think that progressivism also doesn't go far enough. I totally agree. It doesn't sort of get there because it doesn't bring in that sense of the social fabric, right? And that's the thing that I think in the democratic socialism is I hear my friends who like that term a lot, and when I kind of push back on it and refer to it only as an economic theory, they're like, yeah, but that's not really what I'm talking about. What I mean is that the individual feels that the whole is also working on their behalf, that we're not just having to depend on the generosity of some sort of money maker, which is why for me, an idea like a minimum wage, I think is kind of your classic capitalist response. I think we need to have something more like a universal basic income. I'm in that camp, right? I'm like, look, what we should do is have the system guarantee that people are cared for, that we decide on the things that are going to be public versus the things that are going to be private. And I think it becomes pretty clear on those things that should become public. I think it's curious that in the 1910s to 1940s, there was a very highly debated movement in the United States called the high school movement. And it's hard for people to imagine now, but before 1940, it was really up for grabs state by state and county by county if the system would pay for school all the way through 12th grade. Most people didn't finish 12th grade. So the high school movement said to make the country fair, we have to fund education all the way through 12th grade. Part of the debates about private schools and charter schools and school funding and all of this still goes back to that old debate from 70 or 80 years ago, the high school movement. Well, we need to have something like that for college, too. I think we're just totally at the point where high school is not enough for most people. They should go on. We should have a 14th grade or a 15th grade or a 16th grade that we would say collectively that's going to continue to be funded, and not just for liberal arts education, but for trade schools and all the rest. But I don't think you have to get to something that would be that would be a different economic system to get there, but it's a way of rethinking the social fabric that's going to hold someone. To me, fundamentally, the progressive or the social, as you call that, I like this phrase, social capitalism call, is the call that wants to be sure that the safety net that now we want to be sure only holds a few actually is there for everyone. That it's a new bottom floor that someone can't drop below. And I think we should just acknowledge that at the highest level. And I also believe that on top of that, we need to have the government much more involved in certain industries that we know are connected to the well-being of all of us. Can stay out of some industries, but you certainly do want the FAA to be involved in flight, and for an industry like Boeing. I think we need to broaden the number of places where our government has some sort of regulatory power. And so is that the kind of thing you're thinking about, or do you think about it even differently than that?
No, I like those ideas about the basic, level of well-being being woven into the fabric. But yes, what you just said about the FAA being involved with Boeing, I think that's the public interest.
Yes,
being woven into the capitalistic system.
Yeah.
And I think we need more of that. And again, getting back to my original point about language, avoiding the word socialism, but also, frankly, avoiding the word democratic for people who have been so biased against that term. Now you have democratic and socialism.
Right.
You can think of it differently, is what I'm saying. Think of it as a capitalistic system that has social overtones. I
really like that a lot, and I think it's time for us to language that, because the language opens up new criteria. Devin, thanks so much for listening and being part of the show. Hey, Brad from Shoreview, you've got some thoughts on capitalism, huh?
Well, the thing for me is we already have socialism for the 1%. All you have to do is read the book Free Lunch. If we went back pre-Reagan, most people would be happy as a clam. The jobs would still be here. They wouldn't have been shipped out. We had regulated capitalism, and the people like Frank Luntz using propaganda basically to demonize the word socialism, which is just fine for the rich folks to get that money.
Yeah.
But for us little folks, it's out of the question. And those are the things that I think they've done a masterful job with propaganda more than anything else to put us in this situation. I think the movie Vice was right on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're onto something, and I was even noticing that in Truman's argument in 1952 that it wasn't the late 80s and early 90s where they demonized that term and the idea that we'd all be in this together. People are literally still arguing about Social Security. They're not sure if Social Security is the way that we should go. It's totally amazing. Hey, Brad, thanks so much for being part of the repartee. Hey, Gary, last word for you, my friend. You got about 45 seconds.
Well, Reagan's magic word was deregulate. That was getting the government off the rich, and then tax giveaways to the rich. But we don't. I don't think there's any place that has completely socialist countries. I don't think Bernie Sanders is socialist. He doesn't want a government to take over the means of production. To me, that's complete socialism. You go over to Scandinavian countries; they have mixed societies, capitalism and government together.
Yep.
Like our healthcare needs more government control and government in there.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's about the proper application of it, not if you have it or not. It seems like you just want it in the right places at the right times and not in others. I don't know how we figure that out. That's why we need to elect the right people to do that. And we all get to be radio fun. Hey, AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, your afternoon repartee from 4 until 5.